All right, so we've been talking about the conflict in Israel and Palestine a lot on the left wing, probably to the detriment of the channel because the algorithm does not like it. But
So,
we know that it's important to talk about anyway because things like this keep happening. Israel has bombed a refugee camp, and I'm not going to lie, guys. This to me I've been speaking out against Israel for years and their apartheid occupation of Palestine, Gaza, everything. But and apologies for my dog if you just heard that. She doesn't like it either. But the this one broke me. This one, it's just so clearly and obviously evil. It's so inexplicably awful if you watch the videos, see the images of there's a specific video of a looks like 15, 16-year-old kid screaming for God over what must have been a relative or someone else that he loved. And I probably will never forget the image. And what we continue to see coming out of this conflict and the just utter levels of death and destruction being launched against people who are trapped in a city and not allowed to leave. It's heartbreaking. And I'm now at the point where I'm walking around in public less trusting of my neighbors because I'm just like, well, shit. Did they support the bombing of a refugee camp? Does this person think this was okay? And I'm seeing, I've, Desmond, I like to respond to comments, and I have way slowed down because I just can't take it anymore. It's to that level, and it's rough. And just wanted to open up the floor right now because I have a lot of things to say on this topic about the bombing of the refugee camp, about the conflict in general. But I know, I mean, Desmond, I've heard what you have to say about things. I want to hear from.
sure.
We'll throw to Natalie first. What are your thoughts on everything?
Whew. Um, I mean, I also have a lot of thoughts. I've been practicing I read, okay, let me start again because it's a lot. So I also have a lot of thoughts as well. This is very difficult. It's very emotional for all of us. I have friends from Israel. I have Jewish friends. I have Muslim friends. I think when you know people who are connected and you get to hear and listen to their stories firsthand and understand their perspectives, it really changed the way I was approaching how I was reacting to this situation over in Palestine, because I recognize that, like, putting myself in the center of it and telling everybody what I was thinking wasn't important and wasn't valuable. And I was following this account called Black Liturgies, and she talked about practicing a sacred decentering. And I really took that in at this last couple of weeks and have just been trying to actively listen to understand and not to respond, because this is so charged emotionally. This is something that people live and breathe and is in them. It's their homeland. It's here. And so when you're looking at this and you're seeing what's going on, and then on top of it, the fact that it is being basically live streamed. And I think when we look at the history of this from a journalistic perspective and we see, Vietnam was really the first time that people could watch what was going on across the world. And that's why it became so unpopular, because we started to recognize the carnage and the horror of what is actually happening. And to see that propaganda, where it could work in the past, cannot work when you see things for yourself. And to your point, John, talking about the images sort of being burned in your mind, I think that's where we need to start in order to bring us back to our sense of collective humanity. Because what I'm worried about is that this situation is fragmenting us even further apart and is creating more divisiveness and more space for things to be said that maybe we don't feel, but we're saying them, or things to be done that are wrong and harmful and hurtful. And my friend Mohammed Wasi and I, we were talking about this on KDK radio a few weeks ago, and he said to me, I'm trying to give people a lot of grace right now because they've basically lost their minds. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now, is trying to untangle this mess that I have found ourselves in as Westerners commenting on this when we're seeing it unfold in real time, and where we fit into that equation, knowing that our government is a huge part of why this is happening over there.
Yeah, I think this is so difficult for a lot of Americans to grasp because you have like the entire government and so many other governments globally that are supporting this. And also people being raised as Zionists to believe that that is something that Jewish people are entitled to. But I just keep coming back to the fact that so many vulnerable people that are innocent are being punished. Like I read that women, children, and the elderly make up 70% of those who have been killed so far in Palestine. And a lot of it is people who are literally unable to move from where they are and have nowhere to go because the south of Gaza is also being bombed. Like over 3,000 children being killed, and also thinking about the other kids that are going to have to live with PTSD for the rest of their lives. And I don't know, like I think it's horrifying to me. I think we're witnessing like war crimes happen in real time as far as collective punishment, depriving millions of people of electricity and food and water, and the way that Israeli forces have dehumanized people so much. I was watching a video and they interviewed an Israeli official about the specific airstrike. And they were like, can you comment on the amount of civilians being killed? And he responds with, let's rephrase that. Like his first instinct was like to reframe it, to focus on the one member of Hamas who they claimed killed, but it's not really clear how they know that that happened. I don't know. I think it's a really horrifying situation to witness.
Incredibly horrifying. Especially, I mean, even members of the mainstream media who have been in lockstep with anything that's been pro-Israel coverage. I mean, Wolf Blitzer looked pretty caught off guard when the Israeli officials basically confirmed that, yes, we did bomb that refugee camp to get one member of Hamas. One. They were going after one person, and they thought that that gave them the complete authority to kill as many people as they wanted to in the process. It is terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying on so many different levels, not just, like what I'm going to get to here in a second, what's happening here in America, but, obviously the people of Gaza, like they have nowhere to go. We've covered this so many different times on the show, and some of this stuff is kind of just reiterating what we said before, but people of Gaza are locked into Gaza. They can't leave. They are blocked into this area. The only way they can go is to the south, to the Rafah crossing into Egypt, and Egypt is being kind of selective about who is able to come in at the moment. They just started letting people in after weeks of these people being attacked. And when they tried going to the south before, they were bombed when they were heading that direction. It is unbelievable to me that we are not hearing more people call for a ceasefire here in America. I will give credit to Senator Dick Durbin. He's the first person to come out and call for a ceasefire. The only person, as far as this recording today is concerned. And that is mind-boggling to me, as we're hearing members like Lindsey Graham who come out and said that there was no amount of deaths that would ever get him to question Israel. There was another congressman, Republican in the House, who said that, basically he didn't have any problem with however many people needed to die in order for this to continue. It's
because we wouldn't have called the Nazi civilians. That's what he said. He compared the people on the ground in Gaza to Nazis, and it's
chilling.
Disgusting.
It's absolutely chilling. I mean, does Israel have a right to go after Hamas for the attacks on October 7th? Of course they do. But as people have laid out, the leadership for Hamas isn't even in Gaza. They are in Qatar, and the Israeli government knows that. They're not trying to go get them. They're just bombing Gaza indiscriminately, even though they know that for the most part, they're just killing innocent people. As far as I'm concerned, they don't have a moral high ground here. And as the U.S., who continues to prop them up and give them billions of dollars year over year, we have a right to say what's happening there because we directly secured them. I mean, if the U.S. decided not to secure them, they would be completely, and I don't mean this in like a hyperbolic way, but they would probably be wiped off the map. I mean, Turkey has come out recently and said that they are considering going to war with Israel. Yemen's Houthis have already said that they are going to get into this conflict with Israel. Lebanon and Jordan have talked about entering this. I mean, we hear things coming out about Hezbollah possibly like going into Israel and attacking them. Iran said if things don't change, that they're considering attacking them. They're completely surrounded. Egypt right now has tanks that they're rolling up to the border of Israel. If things don't change, this could be a massive conflict that the US essentially has real control over. If they pressured the Israeli government to cease fire, to stop all of this, to allow aid to get into Gaza, to not continue this assault, all of this could be prevented. But our administration is just burrowing forward, allowing for this to continue. And for the first time, what was it, yesterday? President Biden said there should be a humanitarian pause, which is cowardly as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely cowardly. Like, that's not enough. We need a ceasefire. That's how I feel about the situation.
It's beyond parody how disconnected the American government is from the American people on this issue. And by the way, the American people of the last 2 weeks, a month ago, if you told me the majority of Americans would be anti-Israel, I would have laughed in your face. But that is what we're seeing. And I'm not just saying Democrats. I'm saying the majority of Americans are calling for Israel to have a ceasefire. And almost no one in government is. And it's absolutely absurd to me what we're seeing. And I have been fluctuating between extreme grief and extreme hope because of it. Because obviously the grief, I don't think I have to explain that, but there is hope to be had. There is hope that we are seeing people start to stand up. We're seeing people interrupt Biden, interrupt Blinken at conferences calling for a ceasefire. People doing the right thing. And I always, grew up as a kid being like, oh, God, all these evil things that happened in the past, how do people just sit by it and let them happen? It was so obviously evil. And that's what we're seeing right now. If you're seeing this and you're one of the people going, yeah, bomb the human shields. If Hamas is behind a human shield and it's a refugee camp, just drop a bomb on it. That's justified. You probably would have supported the Holocaust. I swear to God. It's the same ideology. And there's really no way around that. But at the same time, it's putting these atrocities in front of the American people, and the majority of them are saying stop, which I didn't think I'd ever see in my lifetime. And that does give me hope.
Before we go any further, I just want to just jump in really quickly, because there is something that we haven't said enough here that I just want to put it into the conversation really quickly here. We have been very critical of the government of Israel on this show, very critical. We'll continue to be so. But as I'm seeing rise of anti-Semitism across the country, I just want to just reaffirm, just in case there was any doubt whatsoever, I in no way will ever hold the people of Israel accountable for what's happening with their government. These are two very separate things. The rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing here in America, especially on college campuses, what we saw in Russia with the plane being stormed, denounce all of that. These people, I mean, the same way that you would see here in America, we are not responsible for what our government decides to do. The same way the Israeli people aren't responsible for what the IDF is doing, for what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing. So I'd hope that people can separate that in their mind, that the Israeli people are not the Israeli government, because this rise in anti-Semitism is abhorrent to me. What I want to keep the conversation focused on is America can condition aid to Israel. We give them so much protection, so much funding. We could legitimately tell them to stop, and they would be forced to do so because they would have no other protection if they didn't do so. That's the kind of pressure that I want to see put onto the US government as this goes forward.
I think it was important that you brought that up, though, about the rise in anti-Semitism, both here and abroad, because there is that link, right? When there's violence in Israel, it increases here against Jewish people in the United States. And this just, in Pittsburgh, this feels so heavy right now because we had the worst shooting in the city's history at the Tree of Life Synagogue
Right.
in 2018. It was a massacre, and it was, you know, a white supremacist. It was terrible. And then this happens. And so there's been this commemoration happening here, all of these things happening over in the Middle East. It's just, you walk outside, Squirrel Hill is a community in Pittsburgh that is a very heavily Jewish populated community. It's one of the largest communities of Jewish people in the United States. They live right in my backyard. You can feel the sadness and the tension. I was at an interfaith dinner emceeing it. There were Muslims, there were Jewish people, there were Christians. They had to have security there because there was just a lot of fear of something happening. So I don't think we're acknowledging collectively as a country the impact that this is having right here in our own backyards. And so when we're talking about violence overseas, we're really talking about where it starts, which is right here at home as well. And to your point, why aren't we hearing more government officials speaking out, or why aren't we calling for things to actually be done? I don't know if the collective will is there yet. And I don't know what that is going to take and what has to happen. You know, not to conflate issues, but you would think after all the gun violence that we've seen in this country, there would have been some action on that. The people want that, right? And it hasn't happened. And so this idea that we need to have this groundswell of collective energy. And John, I have to be honest, I don't see as much of that as maybe you are seeing in terms of solidarity in that space. I don't know if it's just because I'm looking in different spaces online, but it concerns me how there is still so much conversation and debate over the right to exist and over the right to human life and whose life is valued and whose isn't. And I think that's a reckoning that has to happen like here with all of us first, because I don't think we're there yet collectively in this country to make any kind of change and see that reflected in policy directed in the Middle East. And I know that sounds pessimistic, but I've been in a sad place, and I think I understand where you've been too the last several weeks. And the only thing that's keeping me out of it is being around all of my friends from different walks of life and recognizing that I see you and you see me, because right now it just feels like no one's being heard or seen in a way that brings us back to our collective humanity. And that's what makes me nervous.
I'm interested, Natalie, how long have you been kind of involved in this issue? Is this something that you've been rapidly learning about since, you know, the October 7th and this really hit mainstream? Or is this something that you've been kind of following for years?
So I would say I have followed it in broad strokes for many, many years. But obviously, when things escalated, it was a turning point. But I have a lot of friends, you know, from overseas that have shared their thoughts on this for a long time. And I've kept my own opinion to myself because I didn't really feel like my voice had a space here, because this just feels so heavily charged to me in terms of people living this in their existence every day. So not to dodge the question, but it's like, yeah, I've been following it for sure, but it definitely amped up for me.
Yeah, and I asked the question because I've been vocal in this space for years, like well before this, and the reason that I think maybe I see a little more hope and change is because a couple years ago when I was making content on this, I'd lose followers every time. Like significant followers. I'd get so much hate. And I still have people calling me anti-Semitic and all of this shit.
Sure.
But I've never seen the amount of support when I talk about this issue as I do now. I've never in a million years would have thought that in my lifetime, the majority of Americans would be calling for Israel to stop killing Palestinians. Like it blows my mind that in a couple weeks, how much progress has been made. And if the buck stopped here today and no more progress got made, I would agree with you. It's not nearly enough. It's still, as I said, it's a mixture of hope and grief.
Yeah.
Hope that we're getting there, grief that it's still so hard to get there when the correct answer is so clear dead in front of us. But I do think that if things keep going at this rate, it will be there. You know, I do really think that this cannot remain the status quo. The people jumping in front of, you know, speeches from Biden of everything, it's going to get too much. We have people with red hands, with blood on their hands in the air, yelling at Blinken for saying that he's supporting genocide while he's in a UN meeting. Like, that cannot be sustainable for an American politician. And if we keep the pressure up, I do think change can happen. My bigger fear is that it won't go far enough. I don't know. Again, this is just me reading the tea leaves.
No, I appreciate your perspective and for providing context too into the history of what you've been seeing for a while. And I hope you're right. I do.
I do too.
And I hear you.
I usually do.
You know, I think the social media bubbles is an interesting angle to talk about this for a second here. CJ, like with you particularly, like, have you been seeing, I guess, like a change in how people are viewing, I guess, the Palestinian conflict from what you've been seeing online?
I feel like I probably am in more of a bubble online. I grew up originally around a lot of people with very varied political beliefs, and now living in San Francisco, which is kind of a politically hegemonous city. And then my online spaces, I feel like I've been overwhelmingly seeing pro-Palestine posts on social media, and also marches and demonstrations in San Francisco that have been really heartwarming. But yeah, I think it is very difficult to talk about in general. Like, I understand why. I was talking to my dad about this morning, and he said he just like doesn't watch the news because it's so hard for him to figure out like who to believe, especially because, like, I don't think it's surprising that the American government is doing this, even if it's going against popular opinion, supporting a settler colonial state, because the United States is a settler colonial state. Like, we have had like, I don't know, Jim Crow laws in this country. Like, it makes sense to me that they would support an apartheid state, but it's hard. Like, I also don't think that like a ceasefire is enough. Like, I don't think the status quo before the last couple of weeks was sustainable. You can't maintain an apartheid state without violence. So I don't know. It's difficult.
That was the question I was going to ask everyone too, because I hear everybody calling for ceasefire. I understand it, obviously, the need for it, but what's the next step after that? Like, what are we to do after this? Because CJ is totally right. What was happening prior, that wasn't good. That was not a good situation, and it was certainly not sustainable. So what is the next thing that follows that? Because I think if we want to actually see change occur, we have to have some kind of a strategy and not just say ceasefire now. Okay, and it needs to be okay and for me. So
I'll push back on that a little bit, Natalie. I think that you can do things consecutively. I mean, the imminent nature to call for a ceasefire now, like I think you need to build that momentum like continuously, because honestly, what is the point of talking about what's next if those people aren't around to be there for what's next? You know, you have to deal with the tragedy in the moment. Like, innocent people are dying. Like, that has to be the focal point. Like, whatever happens to the people of Gaza can essentially be figured out after the fact. What should that be? Honestly, there are very intelligent people who've been doing this for a very long time, and they're conflicted on it, whether it's a one-state solution or a two-state solution, or the people of Gaza and the West Bank leave to go to other countries like Egypt and Jordan. Who knows? Truthfully, I don't know. And I also don't know that conversation is totally relevant in this moment. Maybe it becomes more relevant a week from now, 2 weeks from now, a month from now. But while these people are under attack, we can't really talk about their futures if we can't even guarantee that they won't have a future. So the ceasefire has to be the immediate thing, the most important thing discussed right now.
I kind of second that, Desmond, while still acknowledging that one of my bigger fears is that we get ceasefire and then all momentum is lost. Like, I think that if we get the ceasefire and it acts as a pacifier to the American people, we have lost an opportunity to make significant change. And we need the ceasefire to happen as immediately as possible. But there's value in discussing what's next, because it's incredible how much my own messaging has changed on this. Because on October 8th, you know, when I made my first video and I go look back at it, I was talking about the classification of Hamas as terrorists, and I've been talking about these things. I look back at it and I realize that I've changed my messaging in response to the American people's change of, oh, we can actually maybe accomplish a ceasefire. I'm going to stop talking about these other topics of how, not justification, but explanation of Hamas's actions, all these things. I've put them to the side and kind of just focused on the immediate obvious issues in order to get the ceasefire to happen. But I think like when this first all started, a lot of us on the left have been used to just fighting with each other on this because no one else would even acknowledge the evil going on. And so I think that's one of the reasons that you saw a lot of backlash, especially in the beginning of this, against people on college campuses, against, people on that, because we went to go to our usual battle stations because we knew what was going to happen. Like we all knew that genocide was a coming, and it has been a coming. But like the American people weren't ready for that conversation yet. But right now, the American people are ready for the ceasefire conversation. And the longer the American people are engaged in this conversation, which is why I'm saying I hope the same thing I mentioned about the labor movement, the more we're forced to talk about this, the facts are on our side. And it's not even just like the facts are on our side in the way that like they are for universal healthcare or something. It's very clear and obvious. Like it is, so anyone who looks for more than 10 minutes at the situation can tell who what the evil is being done. And the more that they learn about it, because for so long they were a lot like what I heard from you, Natalie, like, oh, I don't want to step into this arena. It's too charged, it's too heated. But more and more people are starting to be willing to talk about it online with their friends, with their family. And the more conversation that happens, the more people learn. And the more people learn, the more impossible it is for them to stand with Israel, the state of Israel on this issue. And it's just important that we just don't shut the fuck up. Like we can't let as much as ceasefire needs to be a priority, we can't let that stop us from talking about.
Yeah, there's one final thing I wanted to say before we wrap this all up, John. I was no different a few months ago. I mentioned this the first time we had this conversation when talking about Israel and Palestine. Earlier this year, I was in the exact same space. I did not want to talk about this issue because I didn't feel comfortable talking about it. And the truth of the matter was that I had never attempted to really learn everything that was going on over there. And the moment that I decided, let me just get as much information as I can, it didn't take that long. It didn't take that long. And obviously I kept like seeing as much as I could again and again and again, hearing both sides' perspectives. How is Israel justifying what they're doing? How are the Palestinians justifying what they're doing? It was evident so fast, it really so much so. But I kind of want to bring this conversation right back to the beginning here, talking about this refugee camp. Some people have asked the question, what do you expect Israel to do when they're trying to go after Hamas? And I wanted to end by just saying this specifically. Time and time again, people who are talking about what's going on over in Israel are just saying that they are just bombing people indiscriminately when they don't have to. The United States of America spends billions, tens of billions, 80, $90 billion a year on intelligence. They are very aware of where members of Hamas are in Gaza right now. They could very easily share that information with Israel. They give them open access to that. Israel could send in special forces to go specifically after Hamas, and the Hamas leadership is in Qatar. They don't have to do this bombing campaign that they are doing. They're choosing to do so. They don't have to do it. And so I just want to leave no doubt whatsoever that Israel does not have to go about it this way. And they deserve all of the criticism that they've been getting from us here on this show and from people across the world right now, because these are war crimes, and I will continue to say so until someone finally acknowledges the fact that this needs to end.